Welcome to another episode of the Battlefields Bourbon Podcast, where we sit and sip, talk all things Civil War history and bourbon. I'm Jack, and I'm joined as always by my co-host Elijah. And today's bourbon, Elijah, I'll let you get straight into it.
Yes, we've got 1792 Bottled and Bond. Aside from this being the regular 1792 Bottled and Bond, it's also a single barrel select from Virginia Bourbon Lovers. Virginia ABC picked these and distributed them across the state probably a few months ago now. And me being the bourbon chaser connoisseur that I am, had to go line up at a store, and hope I got lucky with there being one at that store. Sure
Were you
enough,
going for that?
Yeah, I was hoping that because they had 1792 Bottled and Bond, 1792 Full Proof, and there was one other, I can't remember what it was, but there were a few good selections,
okay.
And they distribute them randomly,
yeah.
So you don't know who's going to get what in that regard. So I was hoping for one of the 1792s, and sure enough, the store that I went to, they had both of them. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you get both?
No, because you can only get
only
one per.
Get one. Yeah.
So I just grabbed that one. But I'd had the Full Proof before, and it's good. I mean, they come out of the 125 proof every time, and they're tasty. But this one was somewhat different. The Bottled and Bond you don't ever see, especially not as a single barrel select. So I had to go for that one. I mean, $47. Couldn't beat it.
You can't beat that.
No, not at all. So, I mean, I got it, and opening it for the first time tonight on the pod because,
that's what we do around here.
That's what we do around
We save
here.
our bottles just for your ears.
Fresh cracks out here. But
decent pop.
Yeah, decent pop. I'll get a good one eventually. You can't get a good one every time.
No. The bourbon gods will not bless us with good cork pops every time.
Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things, too. Because, I mean, that cork's a little weird. It's like here's that big plastic top.
Hey, you got to pour yourself one.
Yeah, but you got to get a cork that's got some substance to it, like a crystal cork or something that's got a little bit of a.
Yeah, I'm sure other bourbon people, bourboners. What's the proper term? I don't know. Bourbon drinkers.
Taters.
Taters.
That's the word.
Taters. Is it really?
Oh yeah, that's a thing in the bourbon community. People that line up for releases or chase the stereotypical rare stuff like Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, and Blanton's, the Holy Trinity. They're
called taters.
Yeah.
So maybe I'm not a tater, but I often think when I go shopping or I'm looking at the shelves or looking at bourbons you send me pictures of, I'm often like, man, if I designed my own bottle and had my own bourbon, what kind of bottle shape would I go for? What would my cork look like? All this sort of thing. So 1792, good looking bottle, but it's, I'm not buying it based off its looks, that's for sure, because there's definitely some more unique bottle shapes and labels, but it looks more on the bougier end.
Looks like a brandy bottle more than a bourbon bottle. That
gold kind of chromish top and yellow label, and that 1792 just being all it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's I've had the small batch and the Full Proof, haven't had this one yet, so we're about to try it right now.
Yeah.
One that I've been looking forward to trying for a while, ever since I got it at least. But yes, about taters. Another thing too, just so I have to clear the air with that. Taters don't open their bottles for the most part. They're the type of people that will collect them and never open them, and that's like their thing. They collect them just to look at them and that kind of thing. Like, I don't ever plan to open it. Or
well, if there's any taters that listen to this podcast
open your bottles
and you just love us so much, send us your bottles you don't plan on opening. We'll open them here.
That too.
So you don't have to.
That too. But
so tell us a little bit more about this bourbon, Elijah.
1792, Bottled and Bond, as we had discussed in another episode, the Bottled and Bond Act of 1897, more so for quality and purity of a bourbon, bottled at 100 proof, single distillery, single distiller, single season, aged minimum of 4 years, aged in a government bonded warehouse, the basics of a bonded bourbon. This one being made by 1792, that brand is owned by Barton 1792, who is owned by Sazerac. So, same company that owns Buffalo Trace.
So this is produced at the Buffalo Trace distillery?
No. Barton 1792 is a separate operation.
Okay.
Owned by the same parent company.
But produced, okay.
Yeah. I mean, but still great stuff. Another one of those distilleries that you just can't go wrong with.
Yeah.
The mash bill, so the experts say 74% corn, 18% rye, 8% malted barley. Being one of those Sazerac brands. I don't think any Sazerac brand like that really discloses the mash bill.
No.
I think they like to keep us guessing. But Yeah, I mean, it's just one of those things. The people that really, really know their stuff when it comes to this, I guess, can pick out the ratios and pick out just based off the sweetness or the spiciness.
I'll believe it.
Yeah, I'll believe it. I'll take your word for it.
What's the proof of this?
100 proof because it's
100
bonded.
proof.
Yeah, any bottled and bonded is 100 proof.
Okay, yeah, we talked about that in the other episode. I mean, it's really not strong in a turn-off way, but like I can smell it in the room here, like still.
It permeates. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I noticed that as soon as I popped the cork when it was like right in your face.
Yeah, let's do a little nosing here.
Very sweet.
I'm not getting anything off oak.
Yeah.
No.
It's got a really nice sweet.
It's a subtle though. It's not as sweet as maybe that E.H. Taylor. How long is it aged for? Minimum of
4 years. Yeah, the E.H. Taylor single barrel we had, that one's aged much longer than this one, I'm pretty sure. Just off the palate overall, I think it's aged longer. E.H. Taylor single barrel is much more mellow. This one's actually got a little bit of heat to it for a bonded bourbon. I like it. I mean, it's good.
It seems a little darker than the Taylor too. I don't know if you know.
The Taylor's got more of like a reddish kind of hue to it. This one's more of like that
brown,
golden amber
kind of. Oh yeah, amber for sure.
Kind of look to it. Yeah, that's another thing that they tell you at distilleries and stuff is like part of bourbon tasting is holding it up to the light, kind of eyeing the glass, getting at that clarity, looking at the quality, the color.
There's nothing floating in there, so that's good.
No, that's something you would see sometimes with some of the barrel proof bourbons. Anything that's non-filtered, like non-chill filtered, or just unfiltered in general, like uncut, unfiltered bourbons, you'll find pieces of barrel char in the bottles from time to time.
Is smoky a term people use?
You could.
I don't know.
I mean, it's all subjective.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if somebody tells you you're wrong for the flavor that you're getting, don't listen to them because, I mean, everybody's going to pick up different notes.
My taste buds are different than yours, so.
Yeah, you'll pick up something different from it.
It's good.
I don't think we've ever had a bad bourbon on the show.
Damn it.
I don't think we ever will.
No, it's true.
I don't think we ever will.
Because we probably won't buy them.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I mean, we're going to do the bottom shelf things eventually, which I'm excited for.
Oh God!
But no, this is good, and I heard. So I'll mention this. I was talking with some folks this past week about the podcast, and there are a lot of the older folks I talk with, and some people that'll be future guests here. So I won't name drop right away, but they were saying how one thing they learned growing up was how many years it was aged, just how many years that first sip should be swished around in your mouth to numb your mouth and then swallow it, and then you're good drinking the rest. But
it's an interesting take on it.
It was more of I think she heard it from this big drinker when she was backpacking in Scotland, and it was this guy that's in a big Scottish accent told her that's how they drink it, just like water. Scotch though, so not bourbon. But
to be fair, Scotch is generally lower proof. They're generally about 80 to 86 proof.
Okay.
Not often you see a higher proof Scotch. Anything like what we drink in terms of bourbon proof is generally kind of uncommon for Scotch. But
that high of a proof, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't disagree with that, because obviously, to get that flavor,
yeah, for sure.
Swish it around in your mouth a little bit, let the burn kind of subside, and then really pick apart the flavors that you're getting there. Because if you just knock it back and swallow it, you're not getting anything from that. So part of the tasting process is to kind of, swish it around, let it coat your tongue, really get the essence of what it is.
And I remember you telling me that when I first bought that.
Now it's starting to make sense.
The Bowman.
Huh?
Yeah. And yeah, I definitely, when I just did it there, you get that, not the alcohol, burn, but the spice flavor to it that you were mentioning.
And being supposedly an 18% rye mash bill. For some products, I mean, that could be considered high. For others, it could be lower. I mean, there's some high rye bourbons that are in the 30% range. I mean, you've got that spice to them. This one does have that spice. And to me, and this might sound weird, I almost get a little saltiness out of it. I don't know why that is, but to me, I get a little bit of that with, and I've gotten that with 1792's Foolproof as well. The regular, just their small batch, it's like 94 proof. That one is just completely the opposite, in my opinion, of their higher proof lineup. It's like just straight up sweet corn, no burn to it whatsoever. I mean, for what it is, and it's impressive. I love it. I mean, for a $30 bottle, that's one of the best things you can get on the shelf.
Which one is it?
Just their small batch.
Okay.
Yeah, their regular thing. So they do, like any Sazerac brand, there's multiple expressions of that brand. So you've got your small batch, the bottled and bond, the full proof. There's a high rye, a single barrel, and a sweet wheat.
Yeah.
And the sweet wheat is probably the rarest of them all. And that's a wheated mash bill there. And that one, I mean, I would love to try, because you know how we are with our wheated bourbons, that sweetness and stuff. It's just
like bread, you said, right?
Like bread,
yeah.
like a fresh loaf of honey bread.
I like
love
bread.
It. Or honey wheat bread, I should say. But yeah, it's good stuff, and it's one of those ones that we'll eventually get our hands on.
Yeah.
We'll eventually get on the show. It takes time. You don't find these things every day, so when we get them, we can.
Yeah, balling on a budget here. So, yeah. Anything else with this 1792?
As far as I can tell, not exactly. I mean, being a single barrel as well as being bonded is pretty cool, because then you get two separate designations in one bottle. Because not necessarily, I don't want to say not necessarily, because Henry McKenna, it's another one, is a single barrel bonded as well.
Yeah.
Henry McKenna tenure, at least. Henry McKenna makes some bottom shelf stuff that I haven't tried and probably don't care to try.
Well, I'm telling you now, we're going to have that very old Barton
that's acceptable
on here.
That's acceptable. People go
Decent.
crazy enough about it that's worth
That's
trying
good.
at least once. Yeah,
I mean,
no doubt.
I've had it, and we'll have that on here for sure. Maybe for a smaller battle. Bottom shelf stuff, smaller battles.
I mean, for the very old Barton, we could do one on, like...
We can't give away our
Bartons.
secrets now.
Hey, these are minor spoilers. These aren't the actual episodes themselves.
That's actually a good idea, the Barton family and their story.
Defend the Valley, book shout out, but not quite.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, cool. Well, with that being said, our bourbon has no connection whatsoever to our topic today, which is okay. But it's a bourbon we wanted to pull out for this episode, nonetheless. So, with that being said, Elijah, this is one you've been excited to do for a while, and I've been excited to pitch in and add whatever I can add to it with my experience with this topic, and that is just the blanket term archaeology. And we're going to talk specifically about archaeology when it comes to Civil War sites, every aspect from state and federal, pushed and led and funded archaeological projects for Civil War battlefields, as well as everything down to, kids running around with their little AT Pro in their backyard metal detecting. Mm-hmm. And we're going to cover a little bit of all those aspects, the benefits, the how they assist interpreting battlefields, all those things, as well as the negative side of things. The bad look it often gets, no matter on which side of that spectrum I talked about that you're on. There's negatives to it, and we can talk about why that is and bring some clarity to it. So with that being said, and we talked a little bit about your background in archaeology and metal detecting in another episode. So let's dive a little bit into how we want to hit this today.
Yeah. So I started out with my metal detecting venture when I was probably like 8 years old or so. I was one of those things I'd always followed my parents around doing, mainly my dad, following him around through the fields and woods and stuff, just of sites that we could get permission to go, look around. And once I was kind of just big enough to be able to swing a detector on my own, he got me this Garrett, it's a Freedom 2, I think, or just one of the Freedom series, like an older detector. But it worked great, found me a bunch of stuff starting out for just being a little kid getting into it. But yeah, I got into it then. Really didn't know too much about, the research side of things. Obviously, as a little kid, you're not reading these books, looking at these battle maps and interpreting them, and reading soldiers' diaries with 19th century vocabulary that a kid
which is
naturally
fair.
wouldn't
Totally understand you wouldn't do that. So, but I will say, as a 23-year-old now, you taking the time to do that, which you have, and you'll talk
added
about
so much.
Oh my gosh, and it's so cool to see you do it on your own. Go to the sites, ask me questions sometimes. But then what you end up finding out of the ground, it just helps, well, we'll talk about it, obviously, helps fill in any gaps we've had and just solidify the letters and the maps and all those things.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. I mean, and you've helped me a great deal, whether you realize that or not, just in terms of determining regiments at certain sites and who was where, when, and all that good stuff. I mean, that's helped me tremendously in terms of my research and being able to do what I do. But yeah, started out as a little kid, got into it pretty heavily, found a pretty decent little collection, then got out of it for a little while. Just kind of, life gets in the way as a little kid. You got a million other interests that you think you want to get into and you don't. But finally got back into it as I got into high school. It was like my freshman year of high school. I just, for whatever reason, kind of like wanted to go. Yeah. And I went once, found more. It was probably a handful of bullets, but it was like that addiction hit all over again. It was like, wow, like this is so much fun. I don't know why I ever stopped. And just got into it. And that's really when I got into high school, when things started to turn into the research side of things, turn into why things are where they are, and like whose stuff am I finding, and that kind of thing. And that really helped me find more stuff as well. Because, I mean, being a kid at the time, I was just going to the sites that my dad had permission to for decades and didn't think anything of it. He would just say that, oh, this is a camp, or this is... and give me kind of the history that he knew of it. But then when I got into my own side of research, I was looking at battle maps and looking at troop movements and trying to find camps based off of soldiers' diaries and that kind of thing. And there's a ton of information that you can find that's out there. That's just digging through records and diaries and stuff like that, I mean, these sites are still out there, and it's just such an abundance of information and records, and they're buried so deep. I mean, it's easy to, not easy, but I mean, it's easy to miss something. Like one little site that someone mentions where they say, oh, we were a mile or two off of this road near this. That could be impossible to find, and someone stumbles upon it, and there you go, you've got a new site. Yeah. But yeah, I got into the battle map looking and stuff, and the real research at that point in high school, and then ever since then, it's just kind of turned into where I'm at now. So I've like been able to look at battle maps, determine, kind of the concentrations where the battle lines were, the heavy fighting and stuff, that kind of thing, and then reach out to landowners either by letter, give them a call, stop by and knock on their door, whichever way you do it. You can't really go wrong. But the biggest thing I will say, and I want people that are listening to know, is that you got to have permission from the landowner. It's got to be private property. Like, you got to go about this the ethical way, because there are people that'll go and trespass. There's people that'll go out in the middle of the night and sneak onto people's property, or even federal and state property. There's people that do that, and they give a bad name to the people like me and many of my other friends that do this honestly and ethically, and it gives metal detectorists, and I guess you would call us amateur archaeologists in a sense, a bad reputation, because it's a few bad ones that ruin it for the whole. And I guess where I was going with that is that I would always reach out to landowners either by letter, phone call, door knocking, whatever the case may be, and just ask them, say, hey, like, this is what I know of the area based on my research. I'd really love it if I could come out and, do some metal detecting, see what was left behind. That kind of thing. Just my approach to being able to try to get permission. And usually as a younger gentleman, people like that a younger person is into history.
I don't know if I'd call you a gentleman, Elijah.
I don't know. Yeah, I'm rough and rowdy sometimes.
Yeah, no.
But they always say, and that's one of the biggest things for me with being able to get permission these days, is they like the fact that a young person is into history. Because most people these days, I mean, like we had said in another episode, between you and I, who else in this area that's our age do we know that's into history? Very few, if any. And
if you're out there, let us know. But
yeah, come join us. But yeah, I mean, that was my thing with getting permissions and stuff like that. And another thing to make perfectly clear to everybody: state, federal, any kind of property like that, completely off limits. Don't do it. They will arrest you. You will spend time in prison.
At least in Virginia, right? Well, no.
Federal NPS, National Park Service
obviously.
property. anywhere in the country, big no-no.
Off limits.
Virginia, state property, big no-no, because that's like protected under their like archaeological resources.
Yeah, know
Act.
the laws. Know the laws
Yeah.
of your towns, of the counties, and of your state or commonwealth. It's important to know that before doing anything, because
Don't just help yourself, because that'll get you in a world of hurt.
Yeah, and if you're doing it honestly, that's the last thing you want, is to get your metal detector taken away by the person that owns the property, and everything, all the stuff you found taken away, get trespassed, and have a court date. That's the last thing you want to happen if this is something new you're getting into, for sure.
No quicker way to ruin your passion for
I know,
history
God,
than
yeah.
that. Yeah.
Blow that candle out real quick.
Yeah. But, yeah, that was my thing, was just, starting to get permissions in a new way, that it wasn't just, going to my dad's old spots and stuff like that, and, hunting the same thing and that kind of thing. I wanted to kind of challenge myself to finding new sites, and the way to do that, looking at battle maps, reading diaries, and all that other stuff. And a big thing that people, I think, don't often realize is a vast majority of the artifacts that are in personal collections and museums and stuff like that today don't even come from battlefields. They come from campsites. And that's something that, and this is no knock to you guys, because the Battlefield Foundations, you guys work with battlefields, because that's where the clashes happen. That's where the action happens.
Yeah.
That's where the history is written. They're not written in the campsites. I mean, they have their place and they have their significance, especially when it comes to the archaeological record. But the people that are out there looking for those campsites to preserve that memory are the metal detectorists, the archaeologists, not necessarily
going in people's yards and behind businesses and these places that aren't preserved because they're campsites, like you said. But yeah, I mean, you guys play a huge role in even like, a camp was here, maybe, it's like based off map, letters, things like that. But then to be able to go see the ground for what it is today and go, okay, there's a stream over there, the hills this way, the map shows a wood lot there. Okay, let me look at that. And then I'll go off the accounts and what some documents say. But then you start pulling stuff out of the ground. You start pulling bullets out, buttons out. And you're like, whoa, I know there was this state camp here. And, there must have been a fire here because I'm finding tons of melted lead. So there's stuff like that. It's those metal detectors for sure that are able to tell you where these camps specifically are. And or at times, like just going to Second Winchester, the battle we talked about in episode 1, where those surrender sites were. You're not going to find that on a map. Maybe, they'll be able to circle a rough area. But when you find, piles of cartridge box, plates and things like that and breastplates, you're like, well, something happened right here in this spot. So it helps tell that story that you're not going to find anywhere else.
Right. And that's the thing with what we do, is in terms of our availability and capability. Normal archaeologists that are funded by, a university or the government or whoever they get their funding from can only do so much with what they have.
Yep.
They go, they dig a test pit. If there's nothing there, there's not much they can do. Because they can only do so much with the funding that they receive to determine whether a site is viable for continuing to explore it. And if that's the case, you're kind of, I don't want to say you're short-sighted, but you don't really know the full potential of a site. Whereas us as metal detectorists, we can spend all day, as much time as we have personally at a spot until we deem it okay, yeah, there's really nothing here of any significance.
Yeah.
I mean, we can go out, and it's not like we have to rely on funding. We just have to rely on our free time.
Yeah.
You go out, you go to a site, and you spend as much time as you can there, finding as much as you can, documenting it, and all that stuff. And yeah, I mean, you can really kind of find things and get to places that your normal archaeologist can't.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part about the whole debate between archaeologists and metal detectorists, is there's always this kind of bad blood between the two. To an extent, certain times they get along, but there are archaeologists that just hate metal detectors and metal detectors that hate archaeologists. And it's just...
It's funny, though, because the ones I work with a lot are people you metal detect with on the weekend.
Exactly.
And they're out there working with state folk that are doing an archaeological study for us or for, the Commonwealth or things like that. So it's cool, at least for around here. They're really the same people, but I know in other spots they're not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there was really that division there at times. But, I mean, you called yourself an amateur archaeologist, and obviously I have no room to talk on putting labels on people. But if I know how you do what you do. When you metal detect and things like that, and the records you keep and the research you put into it, and I know I can ask you where you found this bullet or this buckle or whatever, and you know exactly where, and you know what happened there, and you actually have written record of it. It's not just in your brain. So God forbid something happens to you, Elijah. The people that are stuck with your collection, they know where this stuff was found.
They have the story.
Exactly, and that's why it's like kudos to you, because I know there are other people that do that same thing. There's people that don't, but don't call yourself out too bad, because you're doing really good work.
And that's the thing is, like, we both metal detectorists and archaeologists have the same goal in mind.
100%.
So for me, it's odd that there's such that turmoil between the two groups, because we both have the same. I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We both have the same goal in mind.
Yeah.
It's just a different method of achieving that.
Well,
and I think that's where people start to get a little tense about it, is because, like, oh, you're not digging a test pit, you're not,
flagging the ground,
flagging
all the time,
it, or and there are ways about that. Like, I have an app on my phone. It's called GAIA GPS, and you can use that to track hikes, swim. Like, you can use it to track really any recreational activity, but they have an option on there for metal detecting too, and it tracks you, so you can watch the path that you walk on a site.
Yeah.
And you can just
That's
watch that trail.
cool.
Yeah. And then every time you dig
you can
something,
pin that spot,
you drop it. Yeah.
Yep.
You just add the little photo to it. You can take a picture of what you found, and it drops a GPS coordinate right there. So it can really map out a spot for you. And I love that app. I mean, I think it's just the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And it'll tell you how long you were out there for, the date, the weather, literally everything.
Yeah.
It's super cool. But I mean, that kind of...
Can your wife track you on it so she knows you're metal detecting?
No, that's Life 360. That's what that's for. But yeah, that one. I mean, it's a fantastic app for what I do with it, because I can, every time you go back to a spot, you can watch where you missed. So that way,
so when you go back,
you can hit the little paths and little
awesome.
crossovers that you didn't hit before.
It's even better than, it's crazy I bet if you grabbed someone off the the street today that was doing it, back in the 60s, they couldn't have even imagined the technology and then what people are capable of today.
Oh yeah.
Like, I'm sure back then they would have considered, obviously not the people like excavating the pyramids and things like that or whatever around there. Those are one sort of archaeologists, Indiana Jones style. But, if they saw what Elijah was doing today, they'd think, oh, he's an archaeologist, just because the power, and not the power, but just how much information you can collect while you're out there. And I do think, back to kind of, the difference between archaeologists and metal detectors, things like that, or why there's a division sometimes, and why there is, tension at times. I think it's not because like you said, majority of metal detecting folk, have the same goal as archaeologists. It's to tell the story, find what's in the ground, and help it and use it to tell the story. I think where people get confused at times is because there's those bad apples in each group, but specifically in the metal detectors, some people just have the goal of finding what's in the ground and selling it, or finding what's in the ground and putting it in a bucket. And that's, it's my bucket of bullets I've found all across the United States. So there's those opinions, and there's those people on the archaeological side that go in with an agenda and want to do certain things, and they have their minds made up of what they're trying to find, and those ruin it. That kind of ruins it for other people. So I'm not saying that's the majority, but there's bad apples on either side, and there's such a minority though. But it's what creates that division, I believe.
And I that was actually what I was just about to get to. Was like, I understand that archaeologists and folks don't necessarily appreciate the way certain metal detectors do this, because some people try to make a living out of this hobby, and they turn around and sell what they find. And I personally will never sell anything that I've ever found.
Yeah.
I feel that personally it's wrong to profit off of the bravery of these dead men. because
That's a
you
good
don't
way
know.
to put it.
Yeah,
I've never even thought of it that way.
I mean,
I feel bad for buying stuff.
no, because you as the buyer are kind of innocent, I feel, as opposed to the seller, because you just want to have that piece of history because you appreciate it.
That's true. I don't
The
like it
person
floating around
selling
out
it-
there.
Yeah, the person selling it is like, oh, this doesn't mean as much to me as money does.
Yeah.
And I feel like these soldiers, most of them, died to leave this stuff for us to find.
And just to be clear, we don't mean like the dealers that are selling the things either. It's like the people that are finding them and then giving them up.
Like literally straight from the site to eBay type of thing. Like
with no record of where it was found, or maybe they lie about where it was found, things like that.
Yeah, people that just turn it just to make a quick buck, and that's it. And that to me, I think is just wrong. I mean, I feel like if you're going to do this, you should have the utmost respect and appreciation for what you're handling, because this isn't just like your own little toy that you get to go dig up. This is like some serious stuff, like world history stuff.
It is crazy sorry about that. When you actually think about it, and it was like these items that we're finding were bullets were meant to kill. Mm-hmm. You know, they were meant to kill, take a life. Utensils people find were meant to feed a soldier, and that allowed them some sort of comfort and nutrition that they weren't getting on a regular basis. Buttons held people's clothes together. I mean, when you look at it from that perspective of what these items are used for today, and take away the age and patina that they have to them, and actually you look at what they tell an amazing story.
Yeah.
And you can take any artifact, and if you put it behind glass and you put a fancy light over it and you write a nice little card for it, the story you can tell with that item, it's that, and we're getting a little bit ahead, but we got to transition at some point. It's that point of connection to the past for people.
Yeah.
Which is crazy. It's amazing when a kid is able to hold a mini ball for the first time.
And that could be their intro into history.
Yeah, that's what
they'll never look back. Yeah,
I know. So it's, I can remember some of the first bullets ever, I held, and it's cool to be able to make that connection. And as time goes on, and and you can hit on this more, as relics start to decay even more in the ground, because they're not getting any better down there. So if this is what they look like 160 years from now, from then, it's just going to get worse. So, but to be able to just see an item that in that, and we talk about this in another episode about us, but those items that just make that connection and tell that story are so important. And I think especially metal detectors have the privilege and opportunity to kind of be grassroots with it. And you get to research it, and you get to reach out to the person that owns that land and convince them, and then go out there and sweat in the sun or freeze your tail off in the winter if you're doing it then, and get your hands dirty and buy the equipment. It's all you, and you're doing it for yourself. And it's not, if you're doing it right, it's definitely not an investment. I mean, it's not you're not getting a return except there's no glory except in yourself.
Yeah.
And recovering these lost items.
Just to honor the memory of those who fell to stand for what they believed in, North or South. To me, I think that's just incredible. But yeah, I mean, like you said, there's good and bad apples on both sides of things. Even with archaeologists, I mean, there's certain folks that'll document the finds, I guess, throw them in a box, and then they're never displayed or seen by the public.
Yeah.
There was, and I don't know how true this one is, but this was just what I had heard, and it wouldn't surprise me one way or the other. An archaeological dig I heard at either Colonial Williamsburg, Jamestown, Yorktown, one or the other, something in the historic triangle. These folks were doing a dig for colonial stuff because they were looking for evidence of, some of the colonists and that kind of thing. And as they were digging down to the layer that would date to that era, they were digging through Confederate coat buttons and bullets and stuff like that, and they didn't even keep those. They buried them back after the fact because they said this isn't what we were looking for. That's just what I heard. I don't know how true that is. Now,
it sucks if it's true.
It's very possible because the historic triangle of Jamestown, Yorktown, Williamsburg, heavily occupied by Confederate troops, like in the Peninsula Campaign, early on in the war and all that stuff. I mean, it's very, very possible.
Yeah.
I can't confirm or deny whether or not
it's just something
happened.
you heard.
It's just something I heard, and it was something that's like, wow, if that happened, like,
sucks.
That's a bad apple.
Yeah.
But, excuse me. But, yeah, I mean, just getting into like you were saying, the importance of the artifacts and how highly regarded certain things were during the war to give you an appreciation for things. I mean, you'll find bullets that are hammered into poker chips. You'll find bullets that have been carved into chess pieces or,
fishing lures.
Weights,
fishing
weights. And there's even some that have been carved into, some X-rated things.
Yeah.
I found quite a few of those. Those are kind of funny. But then also more practical things. You'll find carved bullets that are made into nipple protectors for the nipple of a musket.
Yeah.
I found quite a few of those, and those are always really cool, but that's a useful tool that they would have used. And other things that they would carve them into that are necessary. I mean, you find them kind of shaped into pencils and stuff like that. I mean, just the average soldier making do with what they've got.
That's cool because it's the camp, and it's like, man,
that's
must
the
have
coolest
been
part
bored.
of camps. Yeah, you find just stuff randomly like that.
Yeah.
There was also an instance that I read, and this was of a camp I haven't found, at least not yet, but I read about it. I believe it was a Pennsylvania cavalry camp or New York cavalry camp. They were talking about throwing Spencer cartridges into their campfire because a Spencer bullet is a brass metallic cartridge. So they were throwing those into the fire, and they would kind of pop. They don't necessarily blow up because there's not enough powder in them to really make them blow up, but they would toss them in the fire and something like a firecracker pop. And one of their officers had seen that they were doing this, or a sergeant, whoever it was, saw that they were doing that, and by doing so, punished them, made them stand at parade rest for like 7 or 8 hours, I think they said, for doing that. And now I've hunted plenty of Union cavalry camps in this area, and you do indeed find Spencer cartridges that are burned. The casings are like blown up. Yeah, where they were tossed in a campfire, and I guess that was widespread. I guess they thought that was a funny thing to do. But also, you need bullets like that for fire starters. Yeah, because they'll pop a casing out or tear a cartridge open and use that black powder as a fire starter to get their campfires going. And I mean it's just practical use. I mean everyday necessities that you'd find in camp. But these things were so valuable to soldiers, like your buttons and your. I mean, that's another thing. Coat buttons being turned into poker chips. You'll find them in camp sometimes, like hammered out flat. Buttons were sort of a currency in certain camps. And I think Andersonville, I had read, was a big hub for like buttons being used as currency in terms of like buying rations and stuff.
How rare they were.
Yeah. Like that, so like they would trade like certain buttons, either state buttons or designation buttons would be worth more, and they would trade for food and that kind of thing. But it's cool to see that they were used in such a way than what they were initially intended. Yeah.
I'll transition a little bit here to the archaeological, from what I know in my experience. So I work in battlefield preservation, and with a lot of the work we do, after you preserve a battlefield and it's all said and done, the next step on our agenda at the Battlefields Foundation is, we want to open it to the public, interpret it, and restore it to what it looked like in that year of the war. And just a big one that comes to mind, that is a huge accomplishment, was the Huntsbury Tract out at the 3rd Battle of Winchester, 3rd Winchester Battlefield Park now. And the Huntsbury Tract was a large portion of the battlefield preserved, and it's now part of the park today. And I think it's like 200-something acres in total. It goes from the north side of Redbud Run to the south side. And it consists of a portion, what is now known as the middle field, where a lot of this heavy fighting takes place during the 3rd Battle of Winchester. It's the hell spot for this battle. It's where tons of blood is shed during this battle. It's in between two woodlots where both armies are coming out of either one. And it's in this middle field that when the Huntsbury property was purchased, first thing we wanted to do was, clear some of the woods because, we're getting some growth of trees there, and we wanted to turn it back into the middle field. Trees started to get cleared. And I'm sorry if my order's a little incorrect here. I'll be corrected by some people, I'm sure, within our organization on that. But I believe the trees were cleared, or a lot of it was cleared first. So then, or at the same time this was happening, they brought in, I think, archaeological crews, teams from like James Madison University under the direction of like Clarence Geyer, who's a well-known historian here in the Valley, and some other folks. And they went out to the middle field and were trying to find based off the 1870s Gillespie map of the battle, as well as battle maps that are in the collection of Nicholas Paserno, who has an amazing collection of the 29th Maine, which is a 19th Corps regiment heavily engaged in the middle field, this portion of the middle field that have been preserved. Maps and description that were given of this part of the battlefield. They wanted to find where a fence line was, right in the middle. It's shown on the maps, and it was shown as obviously an obstacle within the middle of this field that ran across, so it was in the way. But by the time these regiments are engaged, these federal regiments pursuing the Confederates, the fence is coming down. It's being used as kind of makeshift breastworks in the middle of this field, in the middle of the middle field. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to find where the fence was, where the historic fence was and what had happened.
That's a tough thing to do.
I know. Crazy, right? Well, we found it.
Really?
Yeah. So
wow.
what had existed after the war was a fence line. But
so it just took the original path.
We thought it was, where this fence line across the field was then. There was a line of trees that had grown where the fence line was, things like that. So we're like, okay, that was it. Well, after the archaeology was done, we found dropped bullets and dropped percussion caps and a bunch of things in one standard line, which would have shown where this stop of the federal pursuit, the federal push would have been in one continuous line. But it was about 10 to 15 yards to the east or towards the federal original line where they're coming from. So a little bit to the east. So what we came to the conclusion to was we found the line where those drop bullets and percussion caps were in that line. And what had happened is after that fence came down, like the accounts had said, the farmers, as they're returning back to their way of life after this horrific scene takes place in September 1864, is they just rebuild the fence a couple yards next to it. So it's running parallel.
Sense, yeah.
So that's what ended up happening. And then now with that information, and we raise money, you purchase historic snake rail fencing, you get crews together and you rebuild it. Now you go to the battlefield today, and after years we're, maintaining the invasive growth of species that are growing out there to keep it as close to native grasses that would have been growing at that time because it was an open field. And you have that historic Virginia snake rail fencing that would have cut across a lot of open fields in the Shenandoah Valley. And yeah, it looks like it would have looked in 1864, which is amazing. And that's only due in part by the archaeology. In a more recent one, but besides that one, we've done it down in Newmarket with the Buell property, which is recently preserved, where the VMI cadet battery would have been in the far right of the Confederate line during the battle on the east side of Route 11 or the Valley Pike. And we had a crew of, guys that very well, but an archaeological crew out there just doing that whole area, trying to figure out where the actual line of the Confederate battery would have been and how far did the Federal cavalry that was attacking it make it. And through that study that was done, we're able to determine, and as they're working on the report and putting all those GPS coordinates together and mapping it out, and after they flagged everything, we're able to then look at it from a bird's eye view, from a satellite view, and see, okay, well, we found Spencer casings this far in, this far south, and we found return fire shrapnel this far in, and those sorts of things. So as you map it out, you're able to go, okay, well, this is how far the Federal cavalry made it. This is where we're finding, friction primers from the Confederate artillery. This is where we're finding return fire from the Federal artillery across the battlefield, things like that. And then you're finding other sporadic things closer to like where water bodies are, and it's like, well, that regiment or that state wasn't here at the battle, but there's great accounts in like 1862 of camps being in Newmarket. So it's like helping you paint a picture of, well, maybe this was a Federal campsite or Confederate campsite later or earlier in the war. All those aspects to archaeology that really help bring a lot of things to life. Being able to determine where artillery positions were and where they weren't based off friction primers you're finding in the ground and things like that, and where battle lines are. It just really helps tell the story of what happens on the battlefield. But with that being said, that's the battlefield side of things. So back to you a little bit with the camps. A lot of those camps that you've dug, and I think you've done some non-preserved, obviously privately owned skirmish or battlefield locations across the state and really the country. What are some of the most amazing things? I'll ask, and you don't have to tell where you found them, obviously, secrets. But what are some of the craziest things you've found, or revelations that have come about from the work you've done?
So there's been quite a few that I've had that are like a real kind of wow moment for me, as it pertains to like knowing exactly who had what. And this is probably like one of my all-time best finds. I will probably never top this in my life. Is a Confederate officer's two-piece belt buckle. Not necessarily an officer's buckle, just enlisted cavalry. Most Confederate cavalrymen wore them. Just a two-piece CS belt buckle. Most people that know what I'm talking about, if they're familiar with that. I found one of those. And this one, that site is no longer accessible. Yeah. Unfortunately, we lost permission to that one. One of those places.
Still undeveloped, though, correct?
Yeah.
Maybe.
For now, at least.
Yeah.
For now. Just one of those things, I guess, kind of wore out the welcome with the landowner, or a lease had changed hands. I wasn't exactly sure. I just knew that we weren't allowed to come back.
Yeah.
But it was part of the Battle of Middleburg, which we discussed in episode 3 with Aaron. And this was something that we didn't actually mention in that episode, was Jeb Stewart's staff officer, Harris von Bork, getting shot in the neck off of his horse. He had mentioned in his memoir that 2 cavalrymen had fallen trying to help him from under his horse. And where I had dug that two-piece plate was where I had seen a picture of it, and it's no longer on the internet. I don't know if it got taken off because of the fact that it was a photograph of private property, and there might have been a dispute. It's hard to say, but the picture's no longer on the internet for whatever reason, at least as far as I can tell. But it was a picture of the place where I found that buckle, and I was like, wow. I mean, imagine this buckle being dropped by one of the men that died trying to help him from under his horse. Yeah. Because generally, if you take a bullet in Civil War terms to the torso or anything like that, the first thing that comes off is the belt, because you've got to get the jacket open, the buttons off, to look at the wound and assess the wound and determine if it was fatal or not. And that, for me, I mean, I've convinced myself of it just because it's kind of a wow factor story, but it very well could be the buckle of one of those men that died trying to help one of Jeb Stewart's staff officers in a battle like that. I mean, to me, that's just such an amazing thing, and to think of the prior events that piece of metal had been involved in, being Stewart's cavalry at the battle there, it would have been at the Battle of Brandy Station. It would have been
anything before that.
Anything prior to that battle that Virginia cavalry had been involved in. I mean, it's just really amazing to think, like, if only the thing could talk.
Yeah, and I'm the biggest anti-what ifs, quote unquote, guy when it comes to battles or campaigns, and like, what if this happened, or what if this guy was alive? I'm not all about that. Talk about the facts. Yeah. I mean, they're cool to think about, but I just, I have a hard enough time trying to learn as much as I can factually. I don't have time to think about the what ifs.
Right.
But when it comes to the artifacts, and
it leaves a lot for interpretation.
Oh my God. It's just, that's where your imagination could come out to play, because you've got the thing. Okay, you've got the artifact.
You're trying to put the story to it.
And you know the ground, and you know what happened there, and you know that this came from this. Okay, that's all factual, 100%, because you found it. But then it's like just painting the picture of what, if, like you said, if this thing could talk.
Yeah.
And what it would say, who did it belong to, why did it end up in the ground?
It makes your imagination run wild. And the biggest thing is why nobody else found that, because those are, I mean, rare as hell.
Hey, now you're a lucky guy there, Elijah.
I'm very lucky.
Go. Take that one.
That was for metal detectorists out there. They'll understand that this is a big find. But that was the first belt buckle I'd ever found. And
wow. Only one still you found?
Only Confederate belt buckle.
Have you found Federal?
Oh yeah. U.S. belt buckles of different varieties.
God bless. How many do you have?
3, I think. 3.
They were dropping those things like crazy.
That's honestly not a lot for as long as I've been doing this, because there's people out there that have found.
But it's crazy how many people have found too, compared to Confederate stuff.
Oh yeah.
I mean, it's just like they must have just been getting new ones.
They were cranking those things out left and right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I found that. And then with that, probably a few feet away from it, a North Carolina State Seal coat button. And that's even cool. I don't want to say that's even cooler, but it's really cool.
Yeah.
Because that's one of 2 regiments of North Carolina troops that were involved in that battle, 4th and 5th North Carolina. And they were, they described them as a green regiment. So they
were new,
just gotten into service.
Recently enlisted.
So that button was pretty new. And it's a, what collectors would call a local back. So it's a wartime production. Based on the fact that there's no maker's marker on the back of the button.
Okay.
So you can tell, being an 1863 battle, that button was produced, and issued pretty recently. Yeah. And then it was lost shortly thereafter. And the fact that it was one of 2 regiments that could have worn it is super cool to me.
Hold on. I have to go back to the buckle for a second.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I feel like you missed something here in the storytelling. And we can cut this out somehow. If we're not allowed to talk about this, we'll figure it out. But didn't you find one piece first?
Yeah.
And then like a year later, you found the other half?
Technically a year later, but I'll explain. So I found the tongue portion. The buckle is called a tongue and wreath because that's just, or a spoon and wreath. It depends on who you are, how you refer to it as. I found the tongue portion, which has the CS on it. Yeah. That's like the spoon that locks into that. I found that October 10th, 2015 at 1:30 p.m. after a football practice. I remember every detail of that day to a T. Dude, I can recite that day like it happened yesterday. Like, that's how much of a core memory this is for me. Like, it's in, like,
and this is the first half.
Ingrained in my mind. Yep, that's the first half.
I remember you finding this.
Yep.
And it sat lonesome in a little display box.
It sure did.
For a year.
And I thought I would never find the wreath. And I dug that, and man, I freaked out. I was like nauseous as hell. I was about to throw up. I'm not even kidding. Like, it was that big. Because I mean, that's a big find, and that's one of
for
the
you.
things.
And at your age that you found it,
I was 15 years old. Yeah, I didn't, and I wasn't expecting that morning. I found a couple bullets, and I was like, it's just one of those days.
Yeah.
And that being there just blew me away. I mean, to be fair, it was up against a tree. So I think that's why it was missed by other detectorists. It was just one of those things you didn't
How
get
close? Like a couple feet?
Literally right up against it. I have pictures of it. It was right up against it.
In the ground or like half sticking up?
The hole was down in the ground. It was probably 5 or 6 inches deep.
Oh my God.
As far as I remember.
Yeah.
I was using a Nautilus DMC 2B.
Okay.
And the brass signals on that thing.
No idea what that is. But
it's an old, like, I think 1980s metal detector. It's an older one, yeah.
Was it like one of your parents or something that you were borrowing? Or?
Yeah, my dad had got that for me.
Okay.
That was what he was using too.
Okay.
He had one as well. But, I mean, just sounded beautiful. And I'm like, man, this has got to be something good.
So you found that one.
It flipped into the hole face down. And as I was reaching for it, like it was connecting with me what it was. And I knew what it was. But it didn't really register yet.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, okay, that's a tongue. And as I'm picking it up, I'm like turning it over, and I see the CS. And the dirt wasn't caked on it by any means. It just like kind of fell right off it because the soil was so soft. And I just turned it over. And I'm like, oh my God. And like, I was freaking out, and I was like, immediately called my dad because he was on a different part of the property. Yeah. And
losing your mind, I'm sure.
Freaking out. Yeah. And I was like, you're not going to believe what I just found. And I told him, he was like, what? And I was like, it's a CS tongue. He was like, no, you didn't. And he thought I was joking.
He's like, you don't know what that is.
And I came running down, and I showed it to him, and he was like, just kind of, like,
as
you know
a dad is,
like,
I'm sure anything that their kid finds or does. Yeah.
Like, he got me there. But to be fair, he's found a few of them.
Oh, yeah.
In his lifetime. So, I mean, he's not missing one.
Yeah.
But this is where the story comes kind of full circle. I had looked all around it really well, didn't find the other half, found a couple bullets and stuff. I mean, like I said, the site had been hunted hard, so the fact that I'd found that was enough for me. I'm
sure after you find it, you're like, where's the other half? So you're checking all around this tree.
Yeah, and I was like, it's probably under the tree.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Like in the tree, yeah.
And when we left, we didn't even come back for a while. Because my dad was just like, let's go somewhere else. Let's go try this. Let's go try that. And me being I want to try a new spot every time type of person, the type of kid that I was like, okay, let's go try this one. Like, this is going to have potential. We finally, February of 2016, so a few months later, so technically a year later, but not quite, February 2016, I was like, hey, let's go ride back out here and just to see.
Yeah.
And he was like, man, I really don't feel like driving all the way over there. I was like, come on. Like,
Yeah.
what if we find it? And he's like, you know what? All right, we'll do it. So we get out there, and he was like, all right, and then where did you find it again? So I go right to the tree that I found it. Like, I still, to this day, could show you exactly where it came from. Like, it's that much of a, it's that.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be there
in my
forever.
brain.
You're not going to forget that.
And, like, it's right here. And he's like, all right, let's start looking here. So I start, kind of expanding my search pattern from the last time. Because I was thinking usually, like, a belt is, like, probably 3 feet. Max. I mean, because the folks that
they were tiny back then.
Tiny. Yeah, the one that you guys have in the museum across the street is just that waistline is like
it wouldn't fit around my thigh.
Yeah, it's like a kid's waistline. So like I was thinking if the leather just deteriorated the way it was, that wreath should be within a couple feet.
Yeah,
and it wasn't. And I'm kind of swinging. I think I got in a bullet. And my dad walks up to me, and I was like, I just knew. He had it behind his hand or behind his back, and he was like, "Hold your hand out." And I was like, "I already know what this is." Drops the wreath in my hand. I'm like, "You're kidding me."
Where do you find it?
About 30 feet,
wow.
20 yards roughly, and that away from it.
That's wild.
And I was like,
has to be the same. Has to be.
Oh, it fits perfectly.
100%.
It's the Virginia style. That's the style of two-piece it is.
What are the odds that there's two separated within that?
Well, then there's another tongue and there's another wreath.
And you're never going to go back at that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for now, it's the same.
Yeah, no, but the thing with that is how I know it's the same is there's a wear pattern on the bottom of the disc of the CS. It's not a flat edge, but you can tell that it's a little misshapen, and it fits perfectly in where the wreath was cast, and it's got that same little bit to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it fits perfectly like a glove.
That's a one-of-a-kind find. I mean, especially around here.
I'll probably never find another one.
Yeah.
Probably never find another one. And I mean, that's the thing is people have been, and that's what, when I posted it to Facebook, people were like, I've been looking for 50 years and never found one. And I mean, it just makes you appreciate
coolest piece in your collection, you think?
One of them. Because there's buttons that I can attribute to certain regiments.
Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Perhaps even a certain person that I find to be really cool. But, excuse me.
Yeah.
But that one being just the rarest of all, yeah. And that's to me just one of those that it's just like I'll probably never find another one. Like, because there's buttons and stuff that like I found multiple of, but that one, I would probably bet that I won't find another one of those. But
that's so cool.
Other things in terms of notable finds, Fisher's Hill, North Carolina button that I'd found, and we kind of
on non-preserved property.
Non-preserved property. Yeah,
calm down.
This is private property.
This is endorsed by preservationists. Like I know where he found it. It's not preserved.
Yeah, because I immediately went to you about it.
You always ask me, which is like the thing to do, is ask people you know or ask the organization. If you're ever in question, whether it's us, the American Battlefield Trust, or any private group or government group, just to, like we talked about at the beginning of the episode, just to do your due diligence, which Elijah always does. So it was a crazy find. Yeah.
That was the first thing I found on that property, too. I was out there maybe 30 minutes. Got out there, a couple shotgun shells, and then I got another signal. I was like, wait a minute, this sounds, just a little bit better.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple inches down, coat button. I just could tell by the size of it as it was in the dirt. I was like, this is a Confederate coat button.
What state is it?
North Carolina. And that was where we had discussed the whole whose map is right, whose map is wrong, because the Civil War Trust, American Battlefield Trust, their map
different than ours, and ours is different than theirs.
And this is no disrespect to them, because their research probably led them to a different conclusion than yours did. However, what I found confirms that your map is correct, and not theirs,
which is cool.
Yeah, I mean that's cool. But that's the point of why I do what I do, is because like we need to be able to get these answers, like for sure. Yeah. And I got that North Carolina button, and that, sure enough, was
oh my gosh, yeah, I remember that.
Made your map correct.
Yeah, and that was a cool find on your end.
And an early war New York button. I don't know why that lasted until 64. It's 64. Fisher's
Hill, yeah, September of 64.
Why that button was on a New Yorker's uniform in September of 64, but it was on the berm of the Confederate trench line, where I guess some New Yorkers had pushed the line.
Yeah, it's like the area. Well, I'm not going to talk about it anymore because we're getting too close to where it could be, and I don't want to give that spot away or any future plans for that site. But nonetheless, it does add up a little bit with what happens during that battle. And nonetheless, Fisher's Hill, though, it's like many other historical sites, especially in the valley where it's so heavily fought over and so much happens in, is throughout the course of the war, there's so much happening from the beginning of the war in 61 to 62 and Valley Campaign and Federals being in one spot. And then you go, into 64 and the Confederates have control of that area and they're there for an extended period of time as well. So there's a lot of overlap, especially in the valley. So it can get confusing at times, especially some of the campsites. I know that you dig that they're, but they're pretty consistent on what side is there. But Fisher's Hill, I know, is used from early on as 62 all the way to 64 by both sides, falling back to, it's a great defensive position, and I can't wait to do an episode about that battle.
That'll be a fun one.
That'll be a fun one for sure. And that'll be one you and I do because that's just a cool one we both know. Other than that, I've only been metal detecting once in my life, and I'm not going to say where it was. Actually, that's a lie. I did it before when I was a kid when I got a little crappy one from my grandma, which it's not crappy, Grandma, I swear. But it was a birthday present, and I did it in her backyard, and I found like a little trash pit in the woods, but from like the 50s or something. But I went metal detecting with you. What was this, in middle school maybe?
High school.
High school? Was it high school?
High school, because I remember you brought the bullet to football practice.
What a guy I was.
And I remember you had dropped it in class and chipped the patina off the nose, and I was like, why would you do that?
Okay, don't out me like that, Elijah. I care about historical artifacts. No, but that did happen, I'm sure. And
It's bad that I remember that to a T. My memory with relics is insane.
I know, it is scary. But quickly about what I found was that bullet. And your brother was there, found half of a horseshoe, and I guess I could say it. He just chucked it back.
Go ahead,
He's like, we find these, you find them all the time. It's nothing crazy. But for me, as a young person who just sees it from the perspective of a preservation person, so just the land side of things, not always seeing what comes out of the ground like you do, I saw that horseshoe and I saw it chucked and I went and grabbed it, and I still have it. Because now, big picture, I know what happened at that site, and it helps just determine how much activity had happened there since 61 all the way to 64. And it's it's super close to a favorite site, and it's and the bullet's cool, and it's just a cool site. And that's the only time I've been. I do want to go back out with you for sure, just to be there to watch you do it. I don't care about swinging it. It's just when you find it out of the ground, it's the coolest thing. It's cool to
see, and people love seeing that.
I love watching any of the time we have archaeological crews out on our battlefields doing studies for us. I love finding out what they got and what they're finding and where they found it, because it's all about the story.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, on my aisle, on your aisle, it's all about what that item tells and what you can tell with that item. And that's how the public can benefit from it. It's how we can as historians, preservationists, as archaeologists, as metal detectorists. We all have that same goal, and it's telling a story. Yeah. And it's these tangible items that I think everyone can agree with help tell the story better than words on a page. It brings history to life, and it's something that future generations can always physically see, but oftentimes touch to connect with history. Because as time goes on, we get more and more further away from this thing we're so fascinated with, the American Civil War, that, it's always going to be cool to be able, like I said earlier in the episode, for a kid to hold a mini ball. As those get handed out so often now. I doubt there's going to be any left in like 50 years. They're all going to either be in private hands or in a dumpster somewhere. I'm sure that's where they always end up. But it's, that's my favorite part about it, is being able to, I've seen kids' faces light up when you give them an original mini ball, and it's their connection to the past. And like you said, that might be the moment where you spark the interest of someone that's, never even thought about being interested in a kid. That's their core memory, like you have with finding that tongue and wreath. It's that can be a core memory for them, and these, it might just ignite a passion for something they never thought about before or knew about, and they'll be sitting around the table one day with us.
A big thing for me too, just trying to do the most with what I can with the stuff that I find, because obviously that's part of why you do it is to share it with people.
Yeah.
Obviously, it goes in my personal collection, but I want other people to see this stuff and appreciate.
Like, we're gonna post a picture of the tongue and wreath, right, Elijah?
Yeah, it's in the cover photo for episode 3 as well.
Okay,
but it's kind of covered by the title.
Yeah,
so
we'll post a little individual picture of it and other artifacts we have for this episode.
Yeah, but I mean, you reach people through social media, and I like sharing the stuff that I find because that's part of why you do it, is to be able to educate others. And that's another thing that I think has gotten people a big trend here lately into metal detecting and treasure hunting is like the TikTok side of things. Because I started with that for a little bit, didn't gain as much of a following as I wanted, as quickly as I wanted. But I mean, you know, my friends that I dig with, they have quite the following, so it didn't add up. Not that it wasn't worth my time, but I just had other efforts like this to put into.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's satisfying to watch a video of someone like digging something up live. Like that was part of what I would do on TikTok is like just post a video of like me with the hole open. You can see the bullet down there in the dirt. You just reach down in there and grab it, and it's like, wow.
It's touching the surface for the first time in 160 years.
And that's a moment that you can share with everybody. And it's super cool because it's like, while these people weren't there with you to find it, they can relive that moment with you on video.
Yeah.
And that's another cool thing about the documentation side of things is like recording as you're extracting an artifact. So that way you can see the depth, you can see where it was, how it was situated in the dirt, all this other stuff. So it kind of
helps tell that story even more.
Yeah, and it gives you that information without having to. Obviously, you're going to write it down, but it helps you kind of recall how it was positioned, how deep, all that other stuff. So you have that reference on hand.
Yeah.
And not to get sidetracked, because I know we were just talking about like cool finds and stuff, but this is one that I really want to include, because we talk a lot about Eastern Theater stuff, at least so far. Mm-hmm. And I've gone out to Mississippi a time or two to do some detecting with some friends, and we got permission, and this was on private property. I want to make that abundantly clear. As always, I only detect private property. However, this was in Vicksburg, as it pertained to the battle or the siege of Vicksburg. And we got permission to this property, and it had been hunted just as most of any private property that you can hunt in Vicksburg has been. But somehow, some way, someone missed a Louisiana State Seal coat button. And looking at the map, the main Louisiana regiment in that battle that is often talked about, and mainly like the one that was up and down the lines, was the 3rd Louisiana Infantry. And this was just like, I want to say it was in line with where they were, but obviously further back. But to be able to attribute a relic like that in such a historic battle to one single regiment, it's just such a cool thing to do, and it's such an honor to have something like that in your collection, because it's like that's a significant piece of history from one of the most talked about battles of the entire war. Mm-hmm. I mean, for me to be I guess you would call a custodian of that artifact for the time that I'm here, it's an honor, because who else has that? Yeah, and it's not so much just a thing for me as I have this and you don't. It's more so just the fact that it's been brought to light. Yeah. Because one thing that you'll see with at least the archaeological side of things is that coat buttons 160 years later do not hold up like they did back in the day. Yeah. The brass goes through certain oxidation processes to where it'll get very, very brittle. And especially in agricultural fields, cow pastures, stuff like that. Yeah. They get very brittle. They start to fall apart. You'll even find just the backs of buttons where the faces have deteriorated. So here in recent years, it's been harder to find buttons in good quality or good condition, unless you find them in a yard that's never had any kind of chemicals put on it, woods, fields that don't have any pesticides or,
that all
cow
affects
manure.
It. Yeah.
There's all kinds of different things that play into the condition of an artifact. And buttons being the most thin, brittle, fragile, volatile relic you can really find, aside from other stuff like percussion caps or small things. they have an expiration date, no doubt.
Yeah.
And it's important, I guess now more than ever, to really try to record, document, recover as much as you can while you can, just to make sure that there's stuff, on hand for the archaeological record and for future generations to see and appreciate, because obviously this stuff isn't going to end up in private collections forever. Mm-hmm. Somewhere, somehow down the line, it'll end up in a museum or public display somehow. Yeah. I mean, it's like,
I'm sure if your kids eventually, Elijah, don't take your stuff, you leave it to a museum or a historical site.
I've already decided, I decided before I had ever gotten married that if my kids were not interested in Civil War history or didn't want them, I would donate them to a museum that would display them 100%. And take care of them. Yeah, because I want them to be displayed, appreciated just as much as I appreciate them. Because I all the time will go into my room where I keep my relics and just ponder them, my relic room, and just ponder everything and just look at it and go, wow,
it's so cool.
You recall fond memories, because there's a lot of great memories that are linked to each find. It's not just the relic itself; it's the people you were with. It was, how that day went for you after that, just the feeling of the excitement and stuff. Because, I mean, there's no other high in the world like finding a really nice relic and then just, kind of sitting back after you get home and you're exhausted
cleaning
after a
it
long
up
day. You're cleaning it up, putting it in a case, just sitting back and just, wow. Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. And, I mean, it's just one of those things that, for me, I just never get tired of. Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, hell, I've found almost 3,000 bullets in my life. I keep a running tally and everything.
Holy
because,
cow.
I as I document everything.
You have 3,000 bullets? Just
shy of it right now. But I keep everything documented, by...
What does that look like?
A lot of cases. A lot of cases, yeah. But, yeah, I mean, I've getting near 3,000, and still, every time I dig one, I'm like, nice.
It's the same feeling.
It just brings a smile to your face.
And I think
it's a feeling that never gets old.
Well put. And, to see how far it's come since, like we said in the episode, those things were designed to kill people. And now they bring joy to little Elijah as he pulls them out of the ground. But
yeah, what a weird twist.
I know. There's something a twist about it and comforting in a way. Full circle, really. But, no, I think it's really well said. You put it really well about, why it's important, why it should be done, and the importance of it all. Mm-hmm. So I thank you for what you do. It's stuff I can't do. I'd love to do it. I just can't put out the money for a metal detector right now. Yeah. And it's a little weird as a preservationist, us on the side going. So I'll let you handle all the spots I would take, Elijah. But no, I think that really sums up the episode. We were on our second glasses of 1792, so
it must have been good.
Great topic. Good. We're excited to talk about and get this one done. If you sat through this entire episode and listened, because we're an hour and 13 minutes in at this point.
Dang, man, I know, that's a long one.
I know. So if you sat through this whole time, little exclusive offer here. If you reach out to our email, Elijah, what's our email?
Battlefieldsanbourbon@gmail.com.
So that's Battlefields spelled out AND and then bourbon@gmail.com. If you email us and say code word, bullet. If you text us, if you email us and say bullet and then give us your name and address, we will mail you free a sticker. We came out with these Battlefields and Bourbon Podcast stickers. If you listen this far, we will mail you a sticker, no cost whatsoever. Just send us the word bullet and your name and address, and we'll send you a free sticker and a little thank you, because we really appreciate all you folks listening, liking our pages, liking where we're putting the podcast on, sharing it with your friends and family and coworkers. This is really fun to do, and we're going to continue to keep doing these until the government shuts us down, let's say. So, or other stuff gets in the way. But for now, we're going to keep doing these things, cover all topics that have to do with battlefields, whether it's battles themselves, the people that fight in them, the things that were used in them. We can do more, talks on archaeology. Don't forget to, though, follow our social medias like Instagram and Facebook for additional content. We also do videos about the battles we talk about and post about the bourbons we're drinking, as well as some of the sites we go to and the artifacts we talk about. So like those pages, we're on Facebook and Instagram, and maybe we'll start a TikTok after today because you got me thinking again. So I don't know. We'll talk about that.
Content for days.
Exactly. So don't forget to email us at battlefieldsanddbourbon@gmail.com with code word bullet. And
it's like a reward.
It's like a reward if you sat through this now hour and 15 minutes. So thank you all again. Tune in for our future episodes, and thank you all so much for watching.
Thank y'all.